Hello, I'm Dr. Jodi Richardson, and you're listening to, well, Hello Anxiety, a podcast where we end the struggle with anxiety and build our toolkit of practical skills to thrive. If you know me or have been listening to the podcast for a while, you will know that I absolutely love dogs for so many reasons, not the least being that I consider them to be therapy on four legs. If you are a new listener, a very warm welcome to you. It is an absolute joy to create this podcast with Positive Media, and a shout out to Light Family listeners as well. I'm the sort of person who treats our family dog Dusty like a third child. I'll stop strangers in the street and ask to pat their pooch, and my kids do too, and we'll pull over to scoop up a dog who is on a solo adventure around the local streets and make sure that they get home safely again. And I literally did this 2 days ago. All right, so you might be asking, Jodi, why are you telling us all of this, and what has it got to do with anxiety? Well, the answer to your question is cynophobia. Now, you may not have heard of cynophobia, but it'll make more sense when I tell you that cyno is the Greek word for dog. Cynophobia is an extreme fear of dogs. And here today to help us learn all about cynophobia is Anthony Berrick, founder and director of Australia's only practice, and possibly the only practice in the world, dedicated to helping people with a phobia of dogs. Anthony is a psychologist, a highly qualified dog trainer, a devoted dad, a mediocre powerlifter. These are his words, not mine. He's a tragic Arsenal fan and, like so many, has had his own struggles with anxiety. So, Anthony, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Jodi. Lovely to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for the work that you do. It pains me to think that people who might otherwise like to can't have the love and the connection with dogs in their life because of their fear and their anxiety. And so I love that we can record this episode and make a difference to those people in some way, but also direct them to extra help if it's needed. So could you start by telling us what led you to actually opening Australia's first and only Cynophobia Clinic?
Well, that's a very good question. So I've been a psychologist in private practice for coming up to 15 or so years now. And the first few years of my practice was sort of what you call generalist psychology, seeing lots of people from all walks of life, facing all kinds of common difficulties, depression, anxiety, stress, that sort of thing. But I discovered that I really loved working with anxiety in particular. As you said in your introduction, it's something that I have dealt with in my own life, as many people do. And I found that I could really relate to my anxious clients. And I particularly enjoyed doing exposure therapy with people with anxiety. At around the 2013, about 10 years ago, Mark, I have a great interest in dogs, and I decided to explore that a little bit further by doing a dog trainer's certification with the idea that I might just sort of dabble in a little bit of dog training here and there. I wasn't exactly sure what I would do with it, but I knew that was something that I was very interested in and wanted to learn more about. So I did my dog trainer's qualification and basically just kind of used those skills to train my own dog. He was a beagle named Ace. I trained him to detect Vegemite, which is not a terribly useful skill, but it was good fun. And, I just sort of put that on the back burner of maybe this is something in the future that I'll find a way to do more of in my life. And then around 2015, I just happened to have a client who was seeing me for an unrelated issue at the time, but who mentioned their phobia of dogs. So we talked a little bit more about it, and it was actually having quite a significant impact on their life. And I asked them if they would be interested in doing some exposure therapy with Ace. And they said, yeah, let's give it a go. So we went through that process together, and they had a really great result. Fortunately, having done the dog trainer's qualification, I had met lots of other dog trainers, and I was had some networks there that I could call on. And I got in touch with Ryan Tate. He's one of the co-owners of Tate Animals who work with us at the clinic. And he has some amazing dogs that he also brought in to help this client. And we went through this process of doing the exposure therapy with my dog, and then with some other dogs as well, and got them to a place where they were absolutely fear-free and able to, have all the kinds of interactions with dogs that you and I sort of take for granted, and made a huge difference to their life. It was an incredibly enjoyable process for me to be a part of. And I sort of, as soon as I did that, I was like, I want to do more of this. I want to figure out how I can do more of this. And so the idea for the Cynophobia Clinic was born. And then in 2016, made it a real thing. And we've been helping people with phobia of dogs at the clinic ever since.
And I'll point listeners to the website at the end of the conversation, but you can have a look at all the different dogs that are used through the clinic as well on the website. And it must have been just so joyful. And like you said, that we take it for granted, and of course, we are careful, and I'll say that we'll stop strangers in the street to say hello to their dogs, but we'll always ask permission, always, careful around getting permission around patting dogs and things. But unlike a phobia of, say, a chicken or a frog or something that you don't come across very often in life, a phobia of dogs can be really debilitating, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this is the issue with cynophobia, like you said, compared to other phobias, which perhaps spiders and snakes would probably be a more common fear that
than a chicken or a frog. Great examples,
yeah,
Jodi.
But you don't worry about, when you go to a barbecue or a picnic or to the beach or visit a cafe or restaurant, is someone going to bring their pet spider along? And is that spider going to run up to your table and jump on your legs? So having a phobia of dogs is, I think, probably one of the most debilitating phobias that you can have, because you can't even necessarily decide for yourself when or whether you're going to choose to have contact with a dog. Whereas even, if you have a phobia of flying or heights or public speaking or all these other common phobias, I think people tend to have a lot more control over whether and how they come in contact with those things. Whereas, dogs can appear out of nowhere. Unfortunately, they often appear where they're not meant to be as well, which can make life really hard too. And as you said earlier, dogs are part of people's families. And so people, when they have a phobia of dogs, if they're visiting friends or family, or they're invited to a social event, they often feel like they don't have the right to request that the dog be, kind of out of the picture when they're there, because they understand how important that dog is to the person. So yeah, it tends to be very debilitating, has a big impact on people's ability to socialize and be involved in outdoor and recreational activities. And it affects probably a lot more people than most people realize.
Well, that was one of the things I was curious about, and I'd love for you to tell us, how common is it?
So that's a great question. It's one that I wish I could answer definitively, but there just isn't enough sort of high quality research in that area looking specifically at this phobia. We know that anxiety-related difficulties are one of the most common mental health conditions that people experience. And within that, phobias are the most common anxiety condition that people experience. Animal phobias are one of the most common types of phobias, and dog phobias are one of the most common animal phobias. So certainly very common, but the statistics that I have seen, it varies widely from country to country, culture to culture. My best guess would be in Australia, you'd be looking at maybe 5% of kids and maybe half that number of adults.
Oh, goodness. And so I guess that's something for us or those of us that own dogs and take them out to cafes and go for walks and have dogs as a part of our life. It's important for us to probably just be mindful, because as much as I love them, I often just assume everybody else does too. And so we know that it can be really terrifying for some people. And I'd really like you to share with us what some of the underlying reasons are that this can happen. And is it just children?
Yeah, so great question. Certainly does seem to be more prevalent with children. I think there's a few reasons for that. First of all, if you think about the size of, a toddler or a small child relative to the size of a dog, you're talking about a creature that's, for me, would be like the size of a grizzly bear or something. So that definitely plays a big part. And so that's why there is certainly a large percentage of kids who perhaps have this fear at some stage who do grow out of it, almost literally speaking, because as they get bigger and bigger, relatively, dogs get smaller and smaller. And so that size, that change in the relative size of dogs can help people to feel more in control when they're around dogs. In terms of, how do people end up with this phobia? It's interesting because the difference between a fear and a phobia really comes down to the individual's own perception of whether or not that fear is appropriate and the extent to which that fear, kind of has a negative impact on their life. But in terms of what's going on in the brain and how a person learns to be fearful of something, there's no difference between a person's phobia of a dog and my fear of sharks, for example. I'm not saying I have a particular fear of sharks, but if I was, out swimming at the beach and I saw a shark fin pop out of the water and head in my direction, I guarantee I would have a very strong fear response, similar to someone with a phobia of dogs who sees a dog running towards them, right? But I wouldn't say I'm phobic of sharks, and I probably wouldn't attribute much meaning to it. I would just kind of shrug it off and say, well, of course I was terrified. Sharks are big and dangerous and all the rest of it. But at some point in my life, I've learned that about sharks. I wasn't born with a fear of sharks. I've learned that through movies and documentaries that I've seen and things that people say, and seeing the big sharp teeth in magazines and photos and all the rest of it, and hearing stories about things that sharks can do. And so in the same way that you or I would acquire that fear, someone with a phobia of dogs has acquired their fear of dogs through their learning experiences, whether those are direct experiences that they've had with dogs where they felt out of control and overwhelmed. And typically that happens earlier in childhood, or through things that they've heard, scary stories that they've heard about dog bites, or having, maybe an overprotective parent who, whenever they see a dog, has kind of warned the child, "Oh, keep your distance," or, dogs are dirty and you'll get diseases and these kind of things. At some point, their brain has kind of registered that dogs present some kind of threat to their safety.
Yeah.
And once that happens, it's a very automatic and kind of subconscious response that then occurs for that person. In the same way, when I see the shark's fin, I have an instantaneous automatic fear response, this kind of flight or fight response in my body where I feel unsafe and I've got this feeling of I just want to get out of here. It's not a kind of a rational, reasoned thought process that I go through where I think about, what type of shark is it? And is this the time of day that they tend to hunt or not? Right? It's just a very instinctive reaction that happens, almost in my body as much as it is in my mind. And so this is exactly the same kind of thing that happens for someone once they develop a fear of dogs. That every time they encounter a dog, particularly if that dog is off the leash or doesn't seem to be under control, their brain identifies that as a threat and just kind of activates their fear response automatically.
Oh, yes. And I love that example that you've given because it makes it more relatable for those of us that just might have trouble kind of relating. And I think about the way that this alarm in the brain is triggered and how often a natural response from a parent with a child in this situation is to provide some reassurance, isn't it? That you're okay. Why don't you give the dog a pat? You're okay. It's safe. It's friendly. And can you talk us through perhaps in those moments of fear when a child is having this kind of response, what's a helpful response for a parent or a carer or someone who's with that child in that moment, aside from obviously asking the owner of the dog to please pop it on the lead and give the child some space?
Yeah, well, you say obviously, but that's not always obvious to parents. I think parents are often very confused about what is the right way to respond to their child's fear because, for most parents, if they don't have the fear themselves, then it can seem very irrational and disproportionate, silly, ridiculous, whatever words you want to use. But it kind of often doesn't make sense to the parent. And so the natural instinct that we intelligent, rational beings have when we see something that doesn't make sense is to try to kind of bring some sense to it. And so the typical response from parents is to try to kind of rationalize with their child and explain to them, and as you said, reassure them, like, it's okay, he's friendly, look, his tail's wagging, he's just coming to say hello. It's just like Bluey or, whatever else that they think might help to kind of reassure the child that they're not in danger. This kind of approach tends to work quite well when a child is sort of a little bit wary or unsure about something, and they just need a little bit of extra reassurance from, a trusted figure like a parent to tell them, no, it's okay, you're fine, and this thing isn't dangerous. But once that sort of flight or fight fear response has kicked in, a little bit of reassurance, don't worry, he's friendly, he just wants to say hello, that kind of thing, it just goes in one ear and out the other. It's far too little too late to kind of have any impact on the child's emotional state. And in fact, probably what it's doing is communicating to the child instead, I don't understand how you feel. The way you feel is wrong. It doesn't make sense. And you can't trust me to help you. Which is really not the message that we want to be sending a child in that moment of, from their perspective of terror, of feeling in danger. And so that's probably the one of the first conversations I have with most parents is sort of looking at how do you tend to respond to your child's fear, and how can we maybe shift that response to be a little bit more helpful. It's very rare that, parents sort of actively kind of criticize their child or ridicule them or put them down or, scold them for being fearful, although that does happen. I do have lots of adult clients who have told me that that's been their experience growing up, that they were always kind of ridiculed or criticized for their fear. But most parents, I think these days, especially, they want to do the right thing. They want to be kind and caring and supportive and encouraging. But sometimes there's this weird disconnect between sort of smiley, happy parent going, oh, look, he wants to say hello, and the child experiencing a state of panic and terror where it's almost like the parent's on a different planet from the child in that moment.
And we can, going back to your example before about the sharks that there's no convincing you or me, if we're in the water and a shark was coming towards us, that, hey, it's okay, it's just a reef shark, or it's just, it's like, I can see the fin,
exactly.
and I'm not taking any chances.
Exactly. Yeah. So, get me out of the water, let me kind of catch my breath, and then we can have a chat about, what species of shark it was and, why it might have been approaching me. But the first thing that I need when I'm feeling out of control and unsafe is to get back to a place of feeling safe and regulated again before we start having these conversations where, we're engaging that more sort of rational, verbal, thought processing part of the brain, which, in that state of fear, when that flight or fight response kicks in, that part of the brain just goes offline. It's all about survival instinct while that experience is happening.
I really appreciate that you've raised this. And I think that even for listeners where they're like, oh, look, I'm really interested in this because I can learn, I like to learn more about anxiety, but cynophobia isn't something that presents in my life. I think just understanding that when a person is highly anxious, that it's not the time for logical thinking and rationalizing and asking that of the person who's experiencing that high anxiety. And like you just said, that part of the brain is not available. And so, that can come later. But in that moment when the anxiety is really high, what would be a helpful response that you could suggest for anyone listening who has a child that becomes highly anxious in the presence of dogs or in the presence of other challenges in their life?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think when we're talking about, a situation where that fear response has already been triggered, when the child is already in that really heightened, kind of dysregulated emotional state, where they've got these, fear hormones coursing through their body, and they're just kind of in this frantic grabbing on, trying to escape state. I think the best thing a parent can do to send the message to their child that, I get it, I can see that you're having a really hard time, and I'm here to help you, is just kind of step in and help the child regain a sense of control over their experience or the encounter that they're having with that dog. So whether that's holding the child's hand while you kind of step in between them and the dog that's approaching, whether that's saying to the owner of the dog, would you mind putting your dog back on the lead, please? Whether it's picking your child up and putting them on your shoulders as you walk through, a park where there's a dog around, whatever steps you need to take to give your child a sense of safety and that they are not about to be forced into an unwanted interaction with the dog. Just take those steps. Don't worry about, am I going to send the message that dogs are dangerous? And, am I going to mollycoddle them? Am I going to reinforce the anxiety? The only thing you'll be reinforcing is your child's trust in you. And down the road, that's going to be absolutely vital when you start trying to encourage them to be a bit brave and go to places that they might be scared, they might encounter a dog, or have some interactions with, a friend's calm dog. If they don't trust you around this issue, if they think, mum or dad just doesn't get it and they're always telling me everything's fine when it doesn't feel fine at all, then when you try to invite them to be brave and try something new, they're just going to flat out refuse because they don't trust you when it comes to this fear.
Oh, thanks, Anthony, for saying that and putting it that way, because it's that, like you say, it's that connection, it's that strength of relationship. And when I talk to parents, sometimes if I've been at a school talking to a group of parents or, doing a parenting event, sometimes parents will come to me and they'll say, oh, I feel like I've done the wrong thing. And there might be parents listening who are thinking, oh, goodness, I haven't approached it this way. And I always sort of like to say to people, well, we do the best we can with what we've got. And when we know better, we do better. We're always learning. And that's the beauty of these types of conversations. And I think what, Anthony, you were saying is that really validate and really empathise with the child, and certainly in the moment, in the thick of it, make sure that the child does feel physically safe, but also being able to validate that you understand that they're feeling really scared in that moment can go a long way to really supporting them and like you say, strengthening that connection and maintaining that sense of trust that, like you also said, you'll rely on later when you start to change this situation in incremental ways through exposure. And I'd love for you to talk to us more about that, because exposure is something that can elicit some anxiety in people. They think, oh, you're going to make me do the thing that makes me anxious. And it's certainly not about being thrown in the deep end, is it? Can you talk us through, when it comes to introducing someone who has cynophobia to a dog, to that actual moment where they are in the sort of vicinity of a dog in therapy, what's the lead up to that, and how do you make that first introduction?
Yeah, great question. So typically people are extremely anxious about the idea of doing exposure therapy. As you said, the thought of coming in contact with or having an encounter with the very thing that you fear most is not a very appealing idea to most people with a phobia. However, I guess this is the difference between, exposure, full stop, versus exposure therapy.
Yeah.
Is that the encounter is very carefully designed to be a therapeutic one rather than a terrifying one. And when I say designed, that process of designing that encounter is a collaborative process that takes place between the therapist and the client based on the client's needs and based on how their phobia works, their level of confidence and comfort, so that it is a therapeutic and an affirming and confidence building experience rather than just another scary traumatic encounter with dogs. So when it comes to actually doing the exposure therapy work with our clients, when clients turn up to their first session, once we've kind of done the initial consultation and they've decided they'd like to go ahead with therapy, when they arrive, there are no dogs present. They're not walking into a room full of dogs. It's just me and the client, and we spend a bit of time talking about what we might do in the session and how we could set up an introduction to a dog for them in a way that they feel really safe and in control of. So that might look like, me bringing a dog for them to meet on a leash at a distance of, say, 10 meters, and then tethering that dog to a tree or a post where the dog, can't access them. It might be different for a different client. They might want a physical barrier between them and the dog to make them feel safe. But it's about finding a really comfortable, safe starting point for that individual client, and then just really gradually building up from there to have more interactions and more encounters that are, again, in the client's control, that feel safe, that feel comfortable, and that create a new learning experience for their brain where they can be around a dog and feel safe and in control instead of feeling unsafe and overwhelmed and out of control.
I really love that you've talked about the brain in this way, and the therapy. I know that the therapy that you conduct is conducted over a number of sessions. And so can you talk to us about how it's over time with the gradual introduction of the client in a collaborative way to a dog, and then ultimately to different breeds of dogs, that it's the time and this feeling of safety in the presence of a dog that eventually can help kind of almost sort of create new neural pathways for them.
Right, exactly. So the way I like to think about it is, unfortunately, there is no kind of delete button in the brain where we can just sort of erase the stuff that we don't like or overwrite past memories and learning experiences. Every past experience you've ever had will always be with you in some shape or form. But what we can do is create new learning experiences for the brain. And the way I sort of think about it is, it's like we've kind of got this scale where on one side we've got all these horrible negative experiences with dogs where the individual feels out of control, they feel unsafe, they feel dysregulated, overwhelmed, panicked. And our job in the therapy is to create a new database of positive learning experiences where the person feels safe and in control around dogs, where they learn and practice new behavioral responses around dogs, and where they even learn to be with their feelings of anxiety in a different way. Because for most people, even just the experience of anxiety itself is a very aversive experience. And so what we're aiming to do in the therapy is to kind of build up enough of these positive experiences that eventually the scale kind of tips towards the positive. And now the brain has a choice to make when that person encounters a dog. It has to decide, do I activate the fear alarm or not? And if the positive experiences, the experiences of being in control and feeling safe outweigh the negative, then the brain just decides, you're safe here. I don't need to activate this alarm for you. So again, that's a very kind of automatic and subconscious process that takes place. But essentially, that's what we're doing in the therapy process. We're giving the brain enough of these new experiences to convince it that the person is safe in the presence of dogs.
Yes, and it's a number of sessions that will lead to this, but not as many as people listening might think. Is that true?
Yeah, well, this is like one of the things that attracted me with my ADHD brain so much to doing this therapy is that the results are so tangible and so fast, relatively speaking, for most clients. I mean, you're talking maybe 6 to 10 sessions on average. We're not talking about years and years of therapy. That because these new positive learning experiences that the person is having in therapy are so different to the negative experiences that they've had in the past, it's not so much about, we have to match the number of negative experiences. So, if you've had a phobia of dogs for 20 years, well, you'll need 20 years of therapy to 21 years of therapy to outweigh it. It's more about the power and the salience of the experiences that people have. And so if someone's had a phobia of dogs for 20 years and they've spent their whole life either feeling horrible around dogs or trying to avoid any kind of interaction with dogs whatsoever, you'd be amazed how quickly the way they feel around dogs can change when they start to have, even just a handful of positive experiences where they're feeling safe and feeling in control and having, enjoying their interactions with dogs.
Yes, and it's not only about reducing the fear, is it? It's about being able to enjoy a dog. And I wonder if you've got a story that you could share of a client who might have gone on to even own a dog after having previously been terrified of them.
Yeah, we've got lots of those stories actually. Certainly, I've had clients who've kind of done it the other way around, who have thought it might be a good idea to go out and get a dog, whether for themselves, if they're an adult, or for their child, if they have a child who has a fear of dogs, and then have got in touch and said, "Oh, help! What have I done?
No.
This isn't working out. Now I'm terrified in my own house." So that's lovely when we can help someone feel safe and enjoy interactions with the dog that's in their home. But I've had lots of clients who, once they finish the therapy and once they gain that confidence, who sort of discover that actually they really love being around dogs, and they can often relate to dogs, I think, in ways that are maybe quite unique, because a lot of dogs experience anxiety and phobias as well. And I've had lots of clients who have observed that and who have found that really a point of connection for them with dogs. And when they realize that on an emotional level, we humans are not so different from dogs. We've got lots more words and lots more kind of, verbal ways of seeing the world and interpreting things. But when you kind of strip it back to our sort of primary emotions, humans and dogs, there's a reason, why they call dogs man's best friend. And it's because we do have this capacity to connect with dogs on a very, instinctive, emotional level. And once people are able to build enough confidence and bring their fear down enough, then it can really feel very, very motivating and very enjoyable to then be able to have a dog of their own and enjoy those interactions that they've missed out on for so long.
Oh, no wonder you love your work so much. It's just, very, very special what you do, because you take people not only from a place of removing fear from their life around this and the uncertainty, and uncertainty drives anxieties. So in addition to the fear when you see a dog, you've got the uncertainty of every time you go out of the house, will I come across a dog, and will that dog be a risk to me? And so not only are you kind of going from the negative experience kind of to the neutral, you're going way beyond that, down the other end of the number line, and giving people the opportunity to really experience the joy and the companionship that dogs can bring to us. So I really appreciate you being with me today, so that any listeners who are themselves struggling with this or have a child who they're worried about knows that there's so much hope. There's more than hope. There's change that's ready and waiting for you if you get the right help. And I wondered, before we talk about how people can connect with you and work with you and your team, at what point should a parent seek help? So where does this kind of move from maybe having a little bit of fear or being a little bit scared under different circumstances to being a phobia around dogs that needs treatment?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I suppose if we think about the definition of a phobia, it's a fear that causes a significant negative impact to a person's ability to go about living their life how they would choose. So, it impacts where they can go and their social life and that sort of thing. So, if your child is missing out on birthday parties and not wanting to go on play dates and sleepovers because their friends have dogs, or, not able to go to parks and beaches, things like that, obviously that's a big concern. And the other kind of defining characteristic of a phobia is that it causes, what they call clinically significant distress, which is to say that either the experience of the fear itself or having the phobia really bothers the person. So if it doesn't bother you at all, or it doesn't bother your child at all, that they have this fear and they don't miss out on anything because of it, then, it's not at the level that we would call a phobia. So it's almost sort of built into the definition of phobia that a phobia causes you problems. It's not really possible to have a phobia, but it doesn't really, have any kind of negative effect on your life. So if you're seeing that negative effect on your child's life, if they're missing out on things that other kids are able to do because of their fear of dogs, or it's causing them a lot of distress, the actual fear itself, or just the fact that they have this fear is something that really bothers them, then I would definitely consider seeking some extra help. So whether that's with us and getting in touch with the clinic, or seeking support from a child psychologist.
Oh, thank you very much. And for people who are thinking, right, okay, I've learned so much about this today, and I think it is time that I make a phone call. So where is the location of your clinic, and can you work with people if you are working over Zoom, for example?
Yeah, great question. So we are in Sydney. So if you're a Sydney local, then obviously you can come and see us in person. But before we do that, we would have what we call a roadmap session. So that's our initial consultation, and that's just a telehealth consultation to talk about what's involved in the therapy and see if that's something that would be suitable for you. But we do also, just because of the fact that there don't seem to be many other people out there who specialize in helping people with this phobia, we do get lots of inquiries from people all over the country and around the world. So we do have a fair bit of experience also working with clients remotely. And typically what that looks like is coaching, whether if adult clients themselves or the parents of children with this phobia, coaching them on how to go through the process of doing exposure therapy, usually with a dog trainer in their local area, or if they're really lucky and they have a suitable dog in their sort of social circles, they can do it that way as well. And so we do spend quite a bit of time working with clients remotely like that. And I'm also in the midst of developing some online therapy programs. So the first one I'm working on at the moment is for adult clients, and then I'll be developing one for parents who have a child with a phobia of dogs, so that people can do that at their own time. And basically, I'll be teaching you how to do exposure therapy for yourself.
Oh, brilliant. I'm sure that a lot of shoulders have dropped of people who are thinking, I really would love to work with you and your team, but are not local to you. So it's really nice to know that there are a variety of options. So what's the website of the clinic? And I'll also really encourage people to jump on Instagram. I know, Anthony, that the Cynophobia Clinic is on Insta. And what's your web address, please?
Yeah, so it's the cynophobiaclinic.com.au. Cynophobia is CYNO phobia. And yeah, you can also find us on Facebook and Insta. And you can hop online and book a roadmap session if you're ready to get started, or feel free to reach out in the DMs or send us an email or give us a call.
Oh, fantastic, Anthony. Thank you. And I know, listeners, when you log into the website, the first thing that you'll see is a statement that says freedom from fear of dogs. And that is the outcome you can expect over time. So, Anthony, thank you again for your time here with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Jodi.
So thank you so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. And if you know of someone who you think might really benefit from this episode, please share it with them. And yeah, if it's something that is a challenge in your family life, then yeah, check out the Cynophobia Clinic online so you can learn more about Anthony and his team. And also don't forget to follow me on Instagram. I share a lot of tips and ideas and insights over there. My handle is at Dr. Jodi Richardson, JODIRICHARDSON. And while you're there, be sure to follow The Light if you are not already at 89.9 The Light. So thanks again for your time, and I really always am very grateful for your company, and I'll see you again next week. Okay, bye. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and leave a review. To keep the conversation going, I'd love you to join me over on Instagram. You'll find me at Dr. Jodi Richardson. Also, if you'd like a copy of my free 5-day mini email course, Calm Your Anxious Brain, then jump over to my website, drjodirichardson.com, and you can sign up down the bottom. I've really enjoyed having your company. Thanks so much. See you next time.